All right, welcome. I'm Dale Vaughn, Dale Thomas Vaughn to those who are searching on Google. And we are here for the Good Men Project, a how to build a coalition of allies. Equality includes you. This webinar is brought to you by the Good Men Project. I just want to say thank you. That's Lisa Hickey, CEO, publisher of the company. This is a part of the new kind of revealing of the DEI, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Programming from the Good Men Project. And I'm really excited about it. I've been doing this kind of work for nearly 20 years, and I have to say it's very exciting to see the Good Men Project in this work. I think there's not another organization with this kind of depth in engaging men in particular in the work of inclusion. And we know from the Harvard Business Review that when men are deliberately engaged in gender inclusion programs, 96% of organizations see progress compared to only 30% where men are not involved. So this work that we're doing today and the work that the Good Men Project does is really an important piece of moving the society forward. So I just want to bring everybody's attention to that. If you want to look more into how to bring the Good Men Project into your diversity work, go to goodmenproject.com/inclusion, and you'll see there a lot of ways to get involved, including how to set up a strategy call with Lisa. So I want to do a quick introduction of our speakers today for the panel. If y'all will just say your name and your title quickly, we'll go around and do that, and then we'll get going. Lisa, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dale. I'm Lisa Hickey. I am publisher of the Good Men Project and CEO of Good Men Media.
Nicola.
Hello, I am Nicola Graham, she, her pronouns, and I am just a content creator in the life of the world.
With a powerful YouTube channel, I believe.
Oh, thank you.
David.
Hi, I'm David Valdes, and I'm a playwright and an author, and I write a weekly advice column.
Wonderful. And Stephen.
Hi, I'm Stephen Sisto, pronouns he, him, but not stuffy about it. I teach at Syracuse University, where I hold a interdisciplinary professorship, and I direct an institute devoted to disability and entrepreneurship. I'm a poet by trade, memoirist. I have a blog called Planet of the Blind, and I'm really, really pleased to be here today.
Great. Let's go ahead and start with an origin story from each of us. I think that the reason this is important is in the work of allyship, there's a starting point for everyone who becomes an ally or an activist. And I think along that journey, there's multiple kind of mile markers for all of us. I think an origin story can sometimes be a place that we can all kind of coalesce and say, okay, yeah, I've had something similar to that. It makes it, the movement, I think, feel very accessible. So Lisa, do you want to start with an origin story, just kind of how you started as an ally or activist in the work that you do?
Sure, absolutely. So I have been a feminist for as long as I can remember. Like literally, when I was a kid, a group of my friends had to hold an intervention. They came to me and they said, Lisa, you know, we know that you always like to talk about abortion rights and stuff like that, but sometimes we just want to play with our Barbies. and true story. And so I think that the sort of epiphany moment that I had, though, was that I always thought that I had to do it on my own, right? I had to fight sexism by just working harder and trying to break the glass ceiling single-handedly, you know, with trying to bludgeon it down from on top of me. I didn't understand systemic oppression at all, really, until I came to the Good Men Project. And at that point, and, you know, so I would think things like, well, I'm anti-racism. I don't, you know, I think racism is bad, but I wasn't actually doing anything about it because I just didn't understand. I thought racism was an individual prejudice that you held, and the only thing you could do about it was to not think racist thoughts. And so when I came to the Good Men Project and I learned all about systemic oppression and how you really need you need to change all of the systems everywhere in order to fight oppression. That was sort of my aha moment of when I moved to thinking I was just a feminist or anti-racist and actually taking action and becoming so.
Mhm.
Thank you. Let's go in the same order we did before, Nicola.
Thank you. So I will just state that I'm very new to this game, and it was interesting. So my realm change started about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, with the murder, as we all saw, of George Floyd. I am born and raised in Texas, and I definitely lived behind the white supremacy systematic veil of ignorance and them not wanting me to know. And I happily lived in that little Disney fairy tale land, and didn't watch the news, and was that type of person where I just wanted to feel good, and kind of wore that as a badge of honor until this obvious, disgusting act happened on camera. And I feel like it was, as I know a lot of people have said, sort of the perfect storm of us being trapped inside. I live alone with cats. So it was just me, questioning my life, questioning the world. And then this video was, and a lot of obvious social, racial justice things happened last year that I just could no longer be ignorant to. And so once I saw all of that happening, I jumped in. I could not, it was like I had not had water my whole life. I could not drink enough material. I could not find enough people to hear the voices, to have it and to amplify it and to learn it. I joined white groups of where we would learn together so we don't do harm to other people. I joined Surge National, showing up for racial justice, which led me to here in Los Angeles, White People for Black Lives. So I got to be in a white space where we could make mistakes together and learn where I needed to go from there. And I've just been digging in and trying not to guilt and shame myself for the ignorance of my life, because again, I feel like that's part of the system of oppression, and just knowing that I can use it to call other people in is where I am in this journey so far.
Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. David, would you like to go next?
Sure. So for me, my origin story really is like origin, right? I'm Cuban American. My father is a Cuban refugee. My mother was a white woman from Maine. And so I grew up in a very mixed world. And when my parents split, I was only among rural white fundamentalist Christians in Maine in the winter, and in the summer among Cuban, almost entirely Cubans living in Little Havana, Catholic, very different worlds. So I was like moving between worlds and seeing aspects of the world a lot from the time that I was a little kid. I was on welfare. I also was gay and knew that from the time I was 6, which was not really cool with either of my cultures. So, keeping that tamped down, but from the time I was really little, my ears were open to the way people treated each other and saw each other, because I was hearing, white people would see me and see, oh, another white person. And so they would just be like, I got to hear plenty about what they thought about Hispanics, or, at the time, and it was the 70s, it was still Spanish people, right? People, I got to pass among worlds and understand how people actually felt. But I think partly because I grew up religious, I also grew up a preacher by nature. So when I became convicted of things, when I really came to believe things, the older I got, the more I was like, no, that's not right. That's not cool. And when I came out, I was Seventh-day Adventist. I went to religious schools all the way through college. And when I came out, it was a shaking for a lot of people, because I was this very well-known kid in the Adventist world, and people were like, he's gay, he can't be gay. And I kind of took it then, as kind of a mantle that like, I'm going to be the person that helps people see differently about what gay means. And, over my life, it's just sort of become who I am to be like talking about issues of race and class. And, all of us, we keep learning as we go, right? I was super Mr. like, learn about gay people, rethink what you think about, immigrants, rethink what you think about, Latinx people. But I didn't know anything about trans people until my college roommate transitioned in her 40s.
Mhm.
And I was like, there's just this huge hole in my understanding of everything. And a whole new re-education and a whole new world opened up to me. And so that's become one of my, one of the things I talk about quite a bit is gender and gender nonconformity as well.
Mhm.
I'm now the parent of, I have an African-American daughter who's 16. And I thought when I adopted, I thought, great, I'm mixed, she's mixed. I'm the perfect parent for her because we'll have the same experience. And then I had to learn that, a white passing mixed person walking through the world versus a Black appearing girl walking through the world are different experiences. And I had to take that on and learn too. So it's
Mhm.
learn as you go and share as you go.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. Stephen, would you like to go next?
Yes, thanks. Thanks so much. Thanks to this team too. It's wonderful to be part of it. I was born in 1955 in Exeter, New Hampshire, in an era when disabled children were really a problem. Disability is still a problem, and I'll say more about that a little later. But the fact is, my parents were shocked that they had a blind child, and they didn't know what to do about it. And in that era, there was really no information for parents. They insisted, therefore, that I should be just like non-disabled children, which has its virtues, but this is easily 30 years before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So they sent me to public school where the teachers didn't want me, the school administrators didn't want me, the other students didn't want me, because my mother didn't want me to go to the Perkins School for the Blind in Boston, in Waltham. And so she thought that a blind life would be a diminished life. She was a very tough, pragmatic, sassy New England Yankee by nature. And, she actually set me up in some respects to have a very unhappy life, because if you can't celebrate and understand your own difference, you can't really meaningfully be in the world. You trip through the world like a queer person hiding in the closet, like a trans person who doesn't have the vocabulary for how they feel on the inside. Moreover, trying to pass, bullies spot you right away. And, I was beaten up on playgrounds, shoved into walls. I had a great breakthrough in the second part of my origin story, in that in my 30s, having become a poet, having been a writer, having gone to graduate school, I suddenly began to understand that I couldn't really navigate the world as a person trying to pass for sighted, though I couldn't see. And by the way, that's not an uncommon story. A lot of blind people go through this. They can only see a tiny bit holding things up like this, which is what I was, but they'll do anything to avoid being identified as disabled. So I got a guide dog. I went to New York and I got a guide dog, and it opened the doors for me. I just wrote a book 2 years ago called Have Dog Will Travel, A Poet's Journey, about how that dog opened up the doors for me so that I could go anywhere I wanted. I described a thrilling 4-day visit to New York City with just me and my dog, riding the subways, going to jazz clubs, going to Shea Stadium, walking the Brooklyn Bridge, doing the things that I'd always wanted to do by myself, but never knew how to do. As I began to understand all of this stuff, I wrote a book called Planet of the Blind, about growing up disabled and hiding my identity, and what that meant to me as both an imaginative and political bridge to cross. I got deeply involved in disability rights, and obviously with the passage of the ADA, the opportunity came up to help build in higher education new ways of thinking about disability. So I went to The Ohio State University and helped build their interdisciplinary disability studies program in the early 2000s. Then I went to the U of Iowa and did the same thing there. It's my alma mater. And now I'm at Syracuse, where I'm building a program on disability and entrepreneurship, which will be the first of its kind in higher ed, helping disabled students really learn how to move in the world of making things and being employed. The last thing I'll say, and I'll talk more about this when I have another chance, is that the disabled are all of us. They're Black, they're Asian, they're women, they're old, they're young, they're indigenous people. They hail from every ethnicity, every national background. Disability can happen by birth or accident. We are the largest, group of historically marginalized people on the planet. And I think disability offers a great meeting place for talking about the ways in which we can come together and advance the cause of human embodiment and equal rights. And that's another thing I'm very, very interested in. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your work as well. It's wonderful. I guess in the spirit of reciprocity, I'll share my short origin story as well.
Yay.
I started doing this work in engaging men because I had a friend who went through the tragic experience of sexual assault, and then the process of sort of healing and remaking herself. And in that process, I was the first person she told, which later I've learned makes me a person called a secondary survivor in that situation, which has carries its own trauma and its own sort of sense of action, I suppose. So in that process, I was very young. I began questioning the systems around me for her, when wondering where are all the men? Why are there no men involved in this process of healing and renaissance, I suppose. And in those questions, I began to find the hole in the process, the sort of broken bridge in the process. Mm-hmm. And I've then spent the rest of my life building programs that bring men into the conversations, typically around sexual violence in its many forms. But that's, of course, led down a lot of very interesting roads around just understanding what is wrong with masculinity as a cultural kind of construct. Mm-hmm. And then what are the structural things we put in place in this country, in the US, but also really around the world to really install that throughout our culture, our society. So along the way, I've been a part of the Good Men Project many times and different sort of facets. I think this is one of the best places to have I think it is the best place, let's just say that, to have a clearinghouse, a conversation about what it means to be a good man, but what it means to be really involved in these issues that are so tied fundamentally to broken masculinity, toxic masculinity, however you want to call that. And so along the way, I've also gone to grad school and done the work and started a conference called the Better Man Conference about 5 years ago that was working specifically in the corporate world around how do we get men involved in the process of inclusion, which is happening, I think, at its fastest in the corporate world right now.
I think so too.
So how do we do that? And there's 5 years of that work has led me to here to today. And I'm really excited about this panel because I think the next stage of evolution in allyship is moving from I'm doing my work individually as an ally to grow, to Nicola's story, to learn, to find a way to do that in a way that isn't harmful. And then the next level is, how do I build a coalition? How do I join a coalition? How do I become part of a movement? Because that, we know, is how we change things for real, forever. I'd love to start there and just talk about what are the methods you've seen, and I'll open this up to kind of anybody on the panel to really talk about anything you've seen that's been useful as a tool, as a modality. Maybe there's a book you love that's really helped you move forward in creating that coalition, creating that structural possibility in allyship. And I don't know if, Lisa, you want to start us, or if there's anybody else who's just got an answer burning in their soul they want to talk about. We'll just go ahead and be free flowing here.
Anyone have a burning answer they want to jump in with? Otherwise, I'm always happy to talk.
All right, Lisa, take us home.
All right. So over 10 years ago, I helped found the Good Men Project. And the idea was to have a conversation about the changing roles of men in the 21st century, host an international conversation. And I thought, oh, this will be easy, right? Because surely men want to talk about how their roles in society are changing. Like, everyone's going to want to be involved. And I learned very quickly that it wasn't so easy, that men, in fact, did not actually want to talk about how their roles are changing. And the reason they didn't want to, which was also a surprise to me, is because a lot of these rigid gender norms are the basis of so much systemic oppression, right? So when you think about sexism, when you think about racism, when you think about disability rights, when you think about LGBTQIA issues, when you think about the bullying that goes along with all of those, like it's often a male dominance issue that it's white men who want to stay at the top of the pyramid, and abusive white men who have gotten to the top of that pyramid. And I'll say not all men, because, clearly not all men are abusive, but the abusive ones who have gotten to the top of the pyramid know how to build a coalition, right? They know how to build a coalition of other people who will help hide their abuse, manage their abuse, keep resources away from people who could really use them to be able to just live and thrive in today's world. And so it was interesting because when I first founded the Good Men Project, and it was, I wasn't the actual founder, but I drew up the business plan and I said, here's how to make this turn this into a sustainable business where we're talking about the changing roles of men. And I met with Tom Matlack, who was the founder and the original investor in this. And he said, well, how are you going to do this? How are you going to get millions of people to come to this website? And I talked to him about a thing called the tipping point, which was from a book by Malcolm Gladwell. And I just learned this week that the tipping point, that phrase, has racist origins. So I have to think of another way to describe what I'm doing, but I want to point out that the word tipping point was originally used to describe neighborhoods that were all white, and then Black people would move into them. And the tipping point was when white people just started going away in droves because they were worried that the neighborhood had become too Black. And that's like an awful thing, but it's a truth of our history that we don't even have, until a week ago, I didn't even know the name for that. So anyway, what I described when I met with Tom Matlack, and he said, how are you going to do this? How are you going to get millions of people to come to this website and be involved in this conversation? And I said, well, you start with individuals and you move to small groups, and then you go to large groups. And the moment at which an idea moves from the small groups to the large group is the moment at which it tips. So building the Good Men Project became all about getting individuals who shared our values, connecting with small groups who shared our values, and then getting the word out to larger media companies, governmental organizations, educational organizations, businesses, to get to a bigger platform. And that's where our diversity, equity, and inclusion program came from, that idea that in order to get all of this amazing knowledge that we've had through people writing articles, through people coming to phone calls, to people just being engaged in whatever way they can in these important conversations, how do we take that learning and then get it out to the larger groups, such as corporations, colleges, universities, et cetera?
Yeah, I want to just add on to that, which is one of the things I've noticed from the outside is, well, and often from the inside, is the consistency. So there's something about having a consistent place to show up and have these kinds of discussions, which I think that you, Lisa, do so well with the publishers' calls that are going on. Is it 4 times, 5 times a week?
Yeah, 5 times a week now.
5 times a week. So that's a clearinghouse, a place for people to show up and have these kinds of discussions. Again, to Nicola's earlier point, in a place that they can do it without harming others, but also while learning and growing together. That sense of community is so important. So thank you for your work. I'll also share that my early journey, I spoke widely about bringing men into the conversation around ending sexism and sexual violence. And one of the first things that happened to me was I received hate mail, death threats, that kind of full force of fear thrown at me from places I didn't expect. And when this was 2004. What I realized then was it's not even safe to talk about masculinity in the world. Was it even fair to talk about it yet at that point? Like we had to do what the Good Men Project, I needed the Good Men Project to come along before I could do the work that I wanted to do. So I'm really appreciative of that work. And Nicola, I think that's part of, you wrote an article about this exact topic, about receiving pushback and dealing with trolls. Do you want to jump in here and share anything from your story there?
Thank you for that. Yes, it's so interesting because I've had sort of a lull of the pushback because I haven't put out new content in a little while. And yesterday, for some reason, one of my videos, I have a series called The Anti-Racist White Chick, and one of my videos somehow got passed to somebody because all of a sudden I was bombarded by like 5 nasty comments all in a row and personal comments, like really nasty personal comments. And I had to kind of stop and reassess. And it's just, it's very jarring. And to me, as hurtful as they can be. It's just like, but it's hard not to take it personally, but that all being said, to me, it's an affirmation of, oh, good, I'm pushing up against something, and oh, good, I'm making you mad. And, there's some people I do find, oh, this is an opening for possible engagement. None of these people were. They were clearly
right.
Not of that mindset. But I think it's good to get them riled up and angry and mad because I hope it makes them think, at least. And I think that that's really what we're wanting to do in all of these talks about marginalized groups, is just to question people with curiosity. And that was, my journey is living in Texas in a very, very white, safe world. That I didn't question anything. And so it was some of my friends that started just to ask, but why, without needing me to change, without needing anything. And so that questioning of my thought process on anything, whether it was race or class or gender identity or neurological diversity, like whatever it is, I had to stop and be like, but why do I think that? And I realized that it was none of my own making. It was just what I had accepted or seen, or the biases that I had taken on in my life. And so I feel like in building this coalition, again, I can't say enough about these white spaces that I'm in. And while I do know you got to get out of the white spaces as well, I do believe they're great training wheels. I do believe they're great places to go and learn with people, and to me, find that coalition. And so mine is a lot about anti-racism, but I do believe it crosses all of the marginalized groups of people. But that being said, the thing that we speak about a lot is our personal stake in this game, and in all of the game of systematic oppression, in like, what have I lost by being this way? How has this affected me? Even if I am, a heterosexual white woman in this world, I have been affected and harmed by all of these systems of oppression. And I think in these groups of us talking together and talking about how class has affected us, and talking all of these harmful ways, then we learn from each other and we can grow together. And then once we have that grounding and ammunition together, that's when we can continue to call more people in and hold space for people and amplify voices and learn. And so to me, finding that space, at least at the beginning or later on, to me is the way to continue to swell the ground, and I guess not do the tipping point, as Lisa says, which that's such an interesting fact. That's really, I'm grateful for you for letting me know that, but just continuing to call all of us in so that we can, how about tip the system over? Maybe we'll do something like that, but yeah.
Oh, the point of revolution.
Yes, I love it.
So thank you for that. I think, one of the things I've led a lot of groups of men in these conversations. And one of the things I've also seen is similar to that men have got to get in and have these conversations that could be harmful if done poorly, right? Like, so, but have the moderation, I think is an important part of that. I also want to just tag on there that the conversation about, I receive trolls, I receive hate, I receive pushback. That can slow momentum, I think, as an ally and in the journey of becoming. I know it did for me. I was probably too young to have started when I started, but I couldn't not. So when I started receiving that hate mail, it took me probably a year and a half to fully process all of that. I walked a pilgrimage, like I had to. In real life, I had to go walk a pilgrimage to get myself clear enough to come back and do the work. Mm-hmm. And so I think making sure people realize they're not alone in the process, to your point of going to groups and making sure that you're not just like trying to take on the world all by yourself will help you keep that momentum going. So I love that. Stephen, David, would you like to throw in some wisdom about how to build a coalition, how to really get new people or to bring groups of people together? I think you've both got experience in that world.
David, you want to go first and then I'll follow, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Well, so back in the year 2000, I went to the Ohio State University and helped them build their disability studies program. Disability studies is an interdisciplinary movement. It came out of the humanities. It follows in the footsteps of women's studies, African-American studies, Black studies. It is concerned with understanding how embodiment has been treated historically, how it continues to be defined for good or bad in contemporary culture, what the obstacles are to inclusion, what are the untold stories, the ones that we don't know, right? Uncovering the past. These are remarkable things that all of the so-called area studies in higher education have helped us to understand, to embrace, and to enact new ways of thinking about over the last 25 years. Disability studies is interdisciplinary, and that's because disability is everywhere once you learn to look for it. Disability is in fact mediated by, or enforced, or imprisoned by, or released by architecture. How do we imagine architectures? How do we imagine the spaces we inhabit? What is our approach to that? I was talking beforehand, about design justice. Design justice is an important area that's been emerging out of women's studies, disability studies, queer studies. I'll say more about that in a second. Disability is in engineering. It's in the history of the arts. It's in Shakespeare. It's in Melville. Moby Dick is really a book about disability. In fact, Ahab uses the word disability. Disability is in the history of law. There's a remarkable story that concerns an African-American man who was deaf in the state of North Carolina, who in the early years of the 20th century was accused by white people of molesting a white woman. He didn't do it. He couldn't communicate. He knew only a kind of rural provincial sign language. The local sheriff said, oh, well, he's an imbecile. So they locked him up in an asylum. Later, they basically neutered him, and he lived without language, without access to culture, without education, for most of his life until a progressive law student at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill discovered his case and got him freed. So his name was Junius Wilson. There are stories like this in disability land that are really important for the rest of us to understand. Disability and the history of war and warfare, disability and the military. You might not know that the seeing eye dog, which has benefited my life, came out of World War I. There's nothing like a world war to create vast numbers of blinded people all at once. Blindness is a low incidence disability. So it has to happen in a war or, a great conflagration of some kind. There were suddenly millions of blind people. A German doctor figured out that you could train dogs to guide blind people through the newly motorized streets of post-war, Europe. And then the movement came to the United States, and now it's all around at least the developed world. The guide dog. Well, it came out of the war. So many advancements in technology for the disabled have come out of war research or efforts to rehabilitate the disabled. So disability is actually everywhere once you learn to look for it. And when you build an interdisciplinary program, as we did at Ohio State, then pretty soon faculty and alumni come together and go, wow, this affects me, or this stimulates my thinking, right? What can we do to extend the inclusion and dignity of people who have alternate or alternative bodies or embodiments? And I was just saying before we started that there's a wonderful book called Design Justice by a woman named Costanza Chalk, who teaches at MIT. She is herself transgendered. She describes the horrifying experience of going through a airport TSA body scan machine. And of course, the machine, which has AI algorithms designed by white men out in Silicon Valley, doesn't identify her gender difference, signals it as a problem. She's treated to absolutely horrific TSA engagement. And this is the starting point for thinking about who designs our systems. Why are the grassroots people who are affected by them not at the table when we think about design? What is design justice? Design justice is designing things that are dignifying and inclusive for everybody. That chapter touched me because as a guide dog user, I never go through TSA without an enormous kerfuffle. Even though, it should be standard, it's the law, I can take my dog everywhere. They suddenly say, can we take your dog from you? I said, no, you can't. That's not in the picture. Right? You're going to have to pat down the dog. That's the law, but they don't even know the law, right? So in other words, bad design, which comes from the top down, it has to do with systemic racism, systemic, misogynies, systemic ableism. It's from the top down, it leaves us all, crushed in our shoes at the bottom. So building a coalition across these differences really is in a great way centered around understanding that our bodies are incredibly delicate and that when we look out for each other, we're looking out for the broader body politic.
I'm writing a lot of things down. So, and what I'm realizing is that you do a few things that I really appreciate right off the bat is that you lead with a story in every one of these situations. Of course, you're a poet and a storyteller, so that makes sense. To illustrate then a person's need or the societal need to illustrate the questioning of a structure or a policy or design, and then ask the very obvious question, who was not included in this discussion? How can we get the people in the room who need to be in the room to create this design or structure change? And that by itself, I think we're talking about how to build coalitions. And I think storytelling is such a promising way to start that process for people. And so I really appreciate that you do both the form and the content there. You showed it, you exhibited it right there. Thank you.
One of the things that I'm very excited about and very pleased to be living in this time because of is the incredible diversification that's going on right now in the publishing industry. Yeah. And the extraordinary books that we're seeing every day about women of color, people who have crossed the border, liminal peoples, refugees, the disabled, right? We're living in a time of extraordinary storytelling, and that betokens a hopeful future.
Does. Thank you. Yeah. I think this relates, David, to your discussion about gender. I've had this, I'm not going to recall the stat exactly correctly. I apologize. I'll have to dig it out. But I remember a statistic about the millennial generation being the first generation, like 98% of the millennials accepted gender identity was fluid or something. It's just a wild statistic for, when we think generationally. And then, so basically going forward, the very structure of gender itself is shifted. It's already happened. So then the question is, how do we shift the culture and structural norms, the sort of political structure to accommodate the reality that we're all kind of living in now? And I think you eloquently go through this in your piece that's on the Good Men Project as well, which is about understanding the non-binary. Do you want to speak to any of that that lead in? That
Sure.
work for you?
Yeah. So, this has become a big topic of mine, for probably the last 10 years now, as I have come to know more trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming, which are not all interchangeable terms, right? Like more people and their experiences. More and more of my students, I teach at Tufts University and Boston Conservatory at Berkeley. It's been years now since I've had a class without gender non-conforming students. My daughter's generation, they're all so much more aware of this topic than their parents, than their grandparents, for sure. And one of the things that I do is I try to part of my work, with all of my work, whether it's books or plays or columns, is I'm trying to write about the whole world. And I have gender non-conforming or trans characters in my last, my last 4 or 5 plays. Theaters always want to get out of it. They're like, well, we can have a straight person play the role, and I'm like, nope, you've decided you're going to do this play. No, you actually have to have somebody with that lived experience embodying the role because it matters. But then you have to keep reaching. You have to make people keep reaching and keep looking at the rest of the world. And so there's a lot of me saying to theaters, now, do you have any trans people on your design staff? Do you have anyone, instead of just the actors on the stage, or the people off the stage, right? Have you invited non-binary, affiliation group to come to the play, right? Like, what are you doing to actually draw these connections? And it's the biggest note I have to say. It's getting a little bit off your question, but the biggest note I have to say about forming coalitions is always, you have to be working beyond your peer group. You have to be reaching beyond the people that you know. When I have a theatrical event, I had, after the election in 2016, I put together an event of theater artists writing in response to it. I really thought carefully about, who don't I know? I could think of a million writers who are similar to each other, but who don't I know? To make sure consciously that in that group of writers and in the group of performers, that there were cisgender and transgender, that there were people of multiple races and ethnicities, that there were people of multiple genders, of multiple religious backgrounds, being represented both in the writing and in the performing of it. And then also then reaching out into who's in the room of it. Because all these people, they're in this conversation together and they need to be, right? And, marginalized groups don't always have the best track record with understanding other marginalized groups.
You bet.
Being in a space together and saying, oh, wow, right? You just, said you bet there, Stephen. I write young adult novels, and I'm working on one right now that comes out next year. I've got a book that comes out this year, and I realized I have never fully included a disabled character.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Never, right? Like, I have every kind of character, and I hadn't. And I really had to sit with that and think about, why is that? What are my fears? What are my lack of understandings? What are my connections, right? And so in this book, one of the characters is, and I had to a lot of coalition building is humbling yourself, is right, like going in, what don't I know? what is my space? And then I have to listen when this first draft is written. I have to have disabled people read it and say, well, you got that right, or big miss, right?
Yeah,
You
that's
got to
right.
be open to that, right? You have to be open to that. So going way back to your actual question, Dale, I will say this is that the gender and gender nonconformity stuff is tricky for people because it challenges vast systems. It challenges people's sense of themselves. And you have people who have been wounded in the past who can be a little trigger happy with their responses to people who get it wrong. And so
Okay.
I'm always talking to people about that, like, okay, make some grace as people learn. But you have a lot of people who are then super defensive. Well, if you're not going to appreciate that I'm trying, right? Like you have to work with a lot of hot tempers in this world as people are coming up on reframing something that is so big for them. But I'll tell you, my daughter's generation, like they are so, it's so different to hear them talk about it. You know, to hear somebody casually say, well, she doesn't even know if she's a girl, right? Like, what? Wow, right? That was never a conversation we would have had, right? My daughter just last night at dinner was talking about a friend of hers who last year was Emma, is this year Emery. And I think I'm like hearing this and catching up and I'm like, oh, so, you know, how did his family react? And my daughter just looked at me and she's like, you didn't ask the pronoun, it's they, right? My daughter couldn't imagine that I would just immediately go binary, right? Oh, well, if it's not she, then it's a he. And I'm somebody who writes about this all the time. So we have to give ourselves grace. We have to be humble, but we also have to understand that the world is changing and we've just got to keep doing the work all the time.
Thank you.
That's right.
Sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, I was just going to say that's right. And, you know, it's also the case that we have to have comic irony. You know, in other words, you know, how when you're watching a play and you know more about what's going on the stage than the characters do, that's basically comic irony. And we have to learn to practice it in our own lives, that we step back from a situation we're in and say, well, what do I not know, right? What's going on here that hasn't occurred to me? Why is what's happening, you know, really not about me in a conventional way, right? And when we're able to do that, we're able to open up to other people's experiences, learn from them, include them, right? Bringing in a disabled character into your young adult story, which is fabulous. You're opening yourself up to what is it I don't know, right? That's hard for people to do.
Yeah.
You know, it really is, because we're fear-based and we've all been exploited and we've all been kicked around. Elementary school is designed to frighten you to death so that you can't have an original thought, you know, and the economic predations of capitalism are designed to keep you, you know, as a sort of, you know, electrified mouse, you know, and so stepping out of the comfort zone, we can talk about it. Let's all step out of our comfort zones. But the truth is, it's very scary for people. And so one element of activism, as everyone here is modeling it, is to, in a way, be a concert master for how you can do that. And how you can then be enriched by other people's experiences and stories. And then you become stronger, right?
I think you know, a lot of the people who are doing diversity programming, it's in the corporate world, it's in academia, it's in school systems, it's wherever you're doing the work. The work is happening everywhere. But I think these questions of have you invited, who have you not invited? Who don't I know? How do I grow this room? What don't I know?
Right.
And I think there's a certain amount of grace that we have to give each other. I think that's true. There's a certain pace that I expect things to change, and I feel my personal frustration is that it doesn't change fast enough.
You bet. Yeah.
So I think I want to we're coming towards the end of our hour here, and I want to just give everybody a moment to speak to that. Like what would be an accelerant to the movement that you've seen or that you would love to see? And knowing that we have, you know, 6 or 7 minutes here, so I want to give everybody a minute or two to just kind of answer that. Lisa, do you want to start, or do you want to pass?
Yeah, you know, Unfortunately, the accelerants are usually when really bad things happen. So, you know, I don't want to say, oh, I want some other catastrophic event to happen in order for more people to understand this. But the other truth of it is you can't get people to change who don't want to change. So that's where I think we need laws. That's where we need social norms. That's where we need other ways of changing people who are actively resisting change. And then finding the people who do want to change. You know, a lot of things I say on, for instance, the Stop Racism call, is it's not enough to have conversations about racism on these calls. Have a conversation about racism in every conversation you have. Have it at the dinner table, have it with your work colleagues, have it instead of talking about the weather or sports, like just make it a part of your normal everyday activities. And that it doesn't have to be racism, clearly. It can be gender, it can be disability rights. Like find ways of weaving these stories into every conversation you have. So I think that that's the sort of happy way that we could accelerate change.
I would jump in and say that accelerating change also has something to do with holding people's feet to the fire. And so I want to be liked, just as Nicola was talking about, but I'm willing to not be liked. I've been a tenured professor at 3 universities. There aren't very many disabled professors. In every case, I have held the institution responsible for failing the ADA and for really doing a bad job with accessible technologies, with accessible facilities. I've, forced them to face the music, which is that if you don't fix these things, the Department of Justice will come and they will fine you $1 million. So you can either do it now or you can do it later. That doesn't earn me a lot of friends, right? And then I feel bad. But you see, holding people's feet to the fire is what accelerates change. And at every institution I've been at, I left that place in a better state, not just because of me, but because I was willing to hold the place to the fire, and other people stepped up and went, yeah, that's right, right? We need this. At Ohio State now, they have a football team there. Did you know that?
I heard of them.
They
Yeah.
actually at halftime now do the disability, wheelchair logo with their marching band every home game, right? That came from accelerant. And it also came from my willingness to risk not being liked. And that's hard, right? It's hard work we're all trying to do, and that we're hoping to help others do.
I think that's great. Nicola or David, an accelerant you'd love to see or that you've seen in the past?
I'll just speak to, I feel like in this world now that is so social media inclined and online and not a lot of, old school face-to-face engagement, especially during a pandemic, I feel like the best way to do it can be online, on Instagram, on things like that. And what I sort of did when I was a brand new newbie to this game, which again, as I said, was not that long ago, but I sort of insulated myself with just like-minded voices and people that I wanted to learn from, but then also people that were like me, so I could be safe from the dissenters and those that are doing things. And what I have learned, and I feel like is a way to accelerate, not to the, very opposite people that don't want to be changed, but those that might be curious or might be like me and just did not know, might be living in ignorance without knowing, is to engage in just follow people that aren't like-minded, so you see other people's points of view, and engaging in things like that, and without condemning people or judging people, but coming in with curiosity and letting them have the why, like, was the thing that changed my mind. To me, it's engaging and having the conversations, being willing to have the difficult conversations, being willing, as we've all sort of said here, to be wrong, to make mistakes, to get messy, giving ourselves that grace, and really just allowing people to maybe find, and you might not see that they've changed, but maybe you've planted the seed that will plant the seed that will plant the seed. And so just continuing to talk and make noise, whether it is, Stephen, in your face, or just like, oh, that's an interesting thought. I used to think that way too, and maybe now this. So I just feel like continuing to engage, as Lisa said, having the conversations all the time, and then possibly maybe setting up, finding those that maybe it's a small group at first, maybe an accountability group once a week. What did you do this last week that raised awareness? What book are you reading? Just, continuing to say once a week at least, how am I changing the privileges that I have in this world, and holding each other accountable in that way.
Yeah, I love this idea of make some noise. Make a consistent growing noise. I like that a lot. David?
And I'll bounce off that. So the companion piece to allies doing the work and changing the hearts and minds of people like them is we need content by people who are not the majority. Content of every kind, books, plays, films, TikToks, Instagrams, right? We need endless content by people who are not the majority, not cisgender, not straight, not white, not native born, like American born, right? We need all of those people to be having their voices out there, because our narratives are so important to us, and you accept the mythologies and the storytelling that you accept from media as you grow up. So when you start seeing other narratives, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree
I
more.
love that. Thank you. I want to just let everybody know that in the chat, I've put in the posts from all three of our panelists, and the entirety of the Good Men Project is available to you to represent Lisa's work, her oeuvre. I also want to make sure that you're all feeling encouraged. So if you're seeing this, you're feeling like, I want to bring this kind of conversation or something more like a classroom-based concept to your world in your work. Go to the goodmenproject.com/inclusion, and that will take you to a page that gives you really everything you need to know to bring a conversation like this to your place of work, your school, your groups. And there's a PDF there that gives a summary of what we do and how. And there's I think some really great pieces at the bottom of that page, including a video from Lisa with her 5 favorite slides from the D&I program. I think that's a great place to go. Okay, I'm gonna take this fodder. I know how it works in the inclusion world. Sometimes you have to be an infiltrator, so you need like stuff. You got to take that stuff and you got to go to somebody else, and you got to build the coalition even internally, right, before you can bring somebody in or you can make the change. So we want to give you all the stuff you need. So goodmenproject.com/inclusion. Again, I've been doing this work with men in particular in the inclusion space for a very long time, almost 20 years now, and my experience of that world is that it's often misinformed. And I can tell you for sure, this is an informed group of work. This is a place where you are going to get intersectionality, and you're going to get really a pro-feminist approach to the conversation about gender. So I want to say thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to everyone who came today to listen. Thank you to Lisa for putting this together, for bringing this into the world. And let's go out there and build a coalition of allies.